There's something about the phrase, educate yourself, that doesn't sit right with me when used to make an argument. This is a thing that I've been seeing appear more and more in small circles from both left-leaning and right-leaning individuals. It is nothing more than an argumentative cop-out, a means of shifting the burden of responsibility from those making the argument to those listening. It's one of the few phrases, in my mind, that will drive the audience away from your point en masse. Now, this video comes in the wake of a little discussion that cropped up on one of the many Discord servers I inhabit, where an argument broke out between some users and two strangers on the topic of race. I'm not getting into the specifics on that because that's frankly another beast entirely. I noticed that the argument these two strangers kept using over and over again when we pressed them on their points was, "Oh, you just need to educate yourself, man. Go read these studies and you'll see what I mean." That alone is not a convincing argument. Look, I'm lazy, okay? I don't want to sift through 30 plus pages of charts and text or a website laden with your 300 links to your sources in search of whatever single point it is that you're trying to make. Either make your case brief and convincing, or you'll come off as ignorant and arrogant. Let's begin by looking at what a convincing argument is, or rather what I think it ought to be. On a basic level, an argument is making a point. Okay, fine. But anyone can simply make an unsubstantiated point, and asserting that point will not magically convert people to seeing things your way. Anyone can throw out a pointless statistic in the hopes of making it stick to the mind of the viewer, the audience, whomever else is in your Discord voice channel, whatever the case may be. To simply state a point is by no means a convincing argument. I need to be drawn into the discussion and held there. Otherwise, I'll just fuck off and do something else. Show me how and why you're worth listening to, or don't bother getting started. I can acknowledge that there is a difference between a good argument and a convincing one, as there are multiple ways to convince someone to take your side on a position. Emotional appeal, appeal to authority, a multitude of ways to hit someone's sweet spot. Since I prefer a balance of factual evidence and reason, that's how I'm going to be approaching this topic. Some people are really skilled at being emotionally convincing or ethically convincing, but we're not going to get into that too much. What I really want to get at here is why being able to explain your point and articulate what it is that you mean is what makes your arguments stronger. I'm no philosopher or professional debater, whatever it is you want to call it. When it comes to the arena of debate, I tend to just shut up and listen. However, I do pay very, very close attention, not just to what people say, but how they frame what it is they want to convey. The goal of any argument should not merely be for you to make a point, but to educate those who come to you with substantiation and explanation. It is far more beneficial, as far as I'm concerned, to assume that whoever may be listening to your argument, or whatever debate you may be tangled up in, knows nothing about what you're saying, and that they've come to listen to you for some nugget of knowledge or a new perspective on something. Consider the way in which Ayden Paladin builds her arguments in her own videos in comparison to someone like Destiny and his debate tactics. I'm only using these two as examples based on how they discuss topics or debate with others. Love them or hate them and what they may think, one of them generally has a reputation for making arguments with a better structure than the other. My point here is not necessarily to bash one creator over the other, but to consider how these creators use data points and studies to support their arguments in order to make themselves more convincing. This is where my issue with the phrase, educate yourself, comes in. From what I've seen in her videos, Ayden Paladin's strength is in the way she synthesizes her sources. She does not merely throw out a data point and leave the numbers hanging with no explanation. Whatever evidence is brought to question, she will not only cite where her information comes from, but what that evidence is and why it ties into her point. The why is the big part. This is what makes her arguments convincing, at least in my mind. Aiden Paladin is willing to take that extra step and educate those curious minds that may not agree with her, and in the same manner invites her audience to look at her sources if they so choose. Now that's not to say that Aiden Paladin presents the absolute best arguments out there, but the formula she uses works. She provides the audience with information, summarizes it to make it digestible and interesting, and then explains how it works in the framework of her argument without forcing the audience to do too much of the brain work. That lack of work on the part of the audience is what makes her content more inviting, for lack of a better term, and thusly more convincing. I am not saying a good, convincing argument isn't one that does the audience's thinking for them, but rather lets them see something in a new light or prevents something they might not have considered while inviting them to learn more at their leisure. Now, destiny, at least in my opinion, lies at the other end of the scale. When I watch how he debates, I've noticed that he firmly adheres to his data points with a less in-depth explanation than what Aiden offers up, or sometimes no explanation at all. That lack of explanation for his citation is what makes his arguments come off as weak. Evidence without explanation is pointless. When his opponents question his data, he seems taken aback or confused as to why they'd question a number. Simplest answer is this: Destiny can cite his sources all day long, but not explain what makes them important, which then makes his arguments fall flat or come off as incomplete. To simply bellow, "Believe the data," at someone is not enough to convince them that you're correct. If all it takes to convince your audience is a number and a percent sign, you're either speaking to a crowd of idiots or statisticians. You can implore your audience or your opponent to read what it is that you're citing, but that doesn't guarantee they'll interpret these articles in the same way that you do. When pressed for more information, and this is chiefly only in cases where he isn't ready to provide that information, Destiny resorts to either imploring his opponent to read the study, to educate themselves, or accuses them of being poorly equipped for debating this topic. Now that jump from discussion to accusation, or in some cases that unwillingness to explain, is why I think Destiny does not make as good of arguments as Aiden Paladin. To be fair, I haven't seen Destiny make a thought-out, long-form video on any topic he's discussed. I've only ever seen him in the fast-paced arena of debate or casual conversation, and I'll admit that there, he's actually pretty reasonable. Similarly, I haven't seen Aiden actively engage in a debate with someone, yet. However, the focus of this little video is not on who has the better debate tactics, but how these two creators structure their talking points. I'd like to make it clear that I firmly believe no one is quote-unquote not equipped for debate, so long as they're literate. Not everyone may be able to understand the significance of a specific data point or statistic, and that's fair, but if you can read, then you can formulate some sort of argument right or wrong. You may not know much about a certain topic, and that's never a bad thing. I would prefer that anyone I speak to admit their lack of knowledge on something rather than lie to make themselves appear intelligent. Additionally, I would not want someone demanding that I educate myself on a specific topic. I will be the first to admit that I am a layman on a great many topics, political or otherwise. And for the audience members, I can only assume that they too are laymen on that same subject, whatever's being discussed at the time. That being the case, I am far more inclined to listen to someone educate me on a topic than I am someone who tries to make their case by effectively calling me an idiot and issuing a reading assignment. To sum up, I'll leave it at this. If in your argument you are incapable of, in at least some capacity, attempting to educate your audience rather than try to make them do it themselves, in my view, that means only one of three things. 1. You don't really know what it is that you're arguing for, only that you think what you're saying is right because someone else said so. This makes your argument empty and useless. 2. You're unwilling to expose the potential flaws in your own thinking to someone who's never heard them before. This can come off as a defensive tactic, which makes your argument come off as faulty or hollow. Additionally, if your argument is indeed flawed, and it probably will be, it is more constructive if you're at least willing to admit mistakes rather than attempt to deflect them. Think of it as a sort of intellectual responsibility. 3. Your goal then is not to argue, but to try and force someone to think the same way that you do. Again, evidence without explanation serves no purpose. It is absolutely foolish to assume that someone else will read something and make the exact same logical conclusion that you do. Alright guys, that's going to be all from me for today. Go ahead and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave me a comment with your feedback, and if you disliked it, tell me why. Maybe there's something I missed, or maybe you just think I'm pants on head retarded. Whatever the case is. I'll see you all on the next one. Buck out.